Welcome to On Time in Full, a podcast from Designed Conveyor Systems.
Welcome to another episode of On Time in Full. I'm your host, Yasmin Hassan. Today, we're talking about something that doesn't always get the spotlight, but is absolutely essential in supply chain success: logistics network design. Whether you're a fast-growing retailer or managing a national distribution network, getting your logistics right can cut costs, boost service, and make everything run more smoothly. To help us make sense of all of this, we have two great guests with us today: Mark Kidwell, Principal at Waller Consulting, and Mike Prince, the Project Director of Consulting Services at Waller Consulting. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. Well, we have a lot to talk about. You're going to walk us through how planning, the right tech, and real-world experience all work together to build networks that work harder, faster, and smarter. So let's get right into it. Mike, I'm going to start with you. For those who might not be familiar, can you break down what logistics network design really means and why it's important for companies trying to stay competitive today?
Yeah, really, it's the who, what, where, and when of supply chain. That's how I like to think of it. So we will do these studies to help people figure out how many facilities they need, where they need to be, what they need to be doing, what the impact on cost and service is. Really, at the end of it, we want to balance out service to the customer with operating costs. So the operating cost is all these buildings you have, what it costs to have those, what the labor costs, what the transportation costs are versus getting stuff to your end user. So, the reason that's important is people grow in all kinds of ways. So one way they grow is by buying other people. And when they buy them, they inherit their network. So what we find over a period of years is that we get facilities, in the same state, in the same city sometimes. We get facilities in places they shouldn't be. A lot of cleanup needs to happen. The other way people will grow is organically. And, they'll start off, let's just say they're a small distributor on the East Coast. Well, fast forward 15 years, they now distribute to the West Coast, and that's their big growing business. So they need help as well. So, this is just, I like to think of these as projects these companies do once every 10 or 20 years. And the reason for that is because that's how long real estate leases tend to last in some cases. So we don't get people that do these projects every single year because typically it's not worth it to move every year to get a few dollars. So these are big projects for the clients we do them for.
Sure. No, that definitely makes sense. And Mark, from what you've seen at DCS, how does having the right logistics network really shape the success of a project and the overall client satisfaction?
Yeah, it is kind of the foundational piece of everything that comes after in the supply chain. As Mike said, getting the right warehouses or DCs in the right location is the foundational piece to having the supply chain perform the way it should, both in an operating cost environment and a service environment. Almost every client is looking for ways to do both, which is reduce cost and improve service. And so when you can find a way to do both, that creates a successful project for the client. So if they spend $5 million or $200 million on a warehouse automation project, it's the right warehouse in the right location with the right mission, servicing the right customers with the right product that enables them to do both. So it's really, it is the first domino that needs to be in line to fall in order for the rest of them to be correct and for the rest of your network to perform long-term, to account for expected changes. And also, as Mike talked about, modeling different things that may or may not happen in the future. If these scenarios happen, which of the answers is the best answer based on different things that might happen? So it allows and enables success and confidence that I'm doing the right thing. I'm investing the money. The invested money is going to be the same. It's better when I invest it the right way. And this is really the key piece to making sure you're positioning your company for long-term supply chain success.
So really just building that foundation to make sure everything else is then in the right position.
Correct.
So Mike, how does your team at Waller and Associates blend tech with consulting to build effective logistics solutions?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the tech is really just the tool we use. So like any tool, we have to know how to use it. And that's where we come in from our people, knowing how to set those tools up, how to use those tools, but also how to use them in a way that makes sense. These aren't tools really where we just push a button and get an answer. There's a lot of setup. We have to build the scenarios that we're going to model. So on a typical project, we might identify 20 or 30 potential locations to go to. There might be anywhere from 10 to 15 scenarios we'll model. And that's really where the tool comes in. So we'll set the scenarios up, and we'll start with a big list and we try to get this down to a reasonable amount. But really what the tool lets us do is evaluate those scenarios quickly. It might take us 4 or 5 hours to run a scenario. I remember a long time ago, I used to make these models. Coding these models, there's an incredible amount of math involved. And that's really what these more modern models let us do now is we set them up, we tell them to run, and they spit out the output, and then we assemble that into the answer. So, it's a mix of our experience, our expertise, and, operations know-how, and then using these tools to actually get answers out of that.
So really you're talking about a pretty big time saver when it comes to making these decisions because of the new tools and the new tech that's been coming out in the last, I don't know, it feels like every other day there's new technology and upgrades and advancements.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the tools are getting more advanced by the day, like you say. They let us get into planning inventory is a good thing where, the tools have come a long way there. Some of them will enable us to do actual route planning within a scenario. Historically, they've all done transportation and cost calculations very quickly. But there's a lot more business functionality coming into these tools. And the reason why we pick some of these tools is that they have lasting functionality that if our clients decide to buy those tools, they actually can use our model as a base to run their business every day after that and help plan inventory, help make decisions around transportation, where, it lets them do the what ifs on their own. So down the road, if they get a new product, they can figure out and use these tools in the network to figure out where they may want to situate that inventory, that product. Does it go to all facilities? Is this only, effective to put in one facility and then distribute through the network? So, we look at that now a lot more of what the lasting impact to the clients might be with that.
Sure. And speaking of that planning, Mark, when a client is looking at their network, how do you help them figure out the role that each facility needs to play? So, for example, if it should be regionally focused on certain products or based on order speed?
That's a key part of the skill set that the modeler, I'll say, brings to the table. And I think to kind of build on something Mike just said, the difference in the tools from 20 years ago to now, the success of the project 20 years ago greatly depended on the coding ability of the modeler. So the better at writing code, the more accurate the calculations would be. And what Mike alluded to is that now a lot of that, most of that is gone as far as the need to write code and write your own math formulas. So that really plays into the question you just asked is, what does an effective modeler help you do? Well, Now it's not they're best at writing code and math. It's they're good at recommending strategies of not only scenarios that should be modeled, and people like Mike who have done this for a long time and know different business strategies and can understand business operations and build a strategy that should be modeled using the new, more powerful software tools, leads into understanding things like what service territories make sense for different SKU populations or order populations or customers. And how do I determine the mission for this DC as compared to, say, the other 2 or 3 or 4 that may be in the network? Are they all the same? Usually not. But what's the right strategies and right scenarios to model? And that really starts to get into the more advanced answers, which is, which items in which DCs in which quantities, how many days on hand should we have? What's a good strategy to model, and understanding the impact of procurement on this, because there's a lot to it, and the business operations skill of the modeler is much more apparent and critical now than it used to be. When it used to be, if you couldn't write the code and do the math, you couldn't build a model. Now the software is much better now. So you need someone who understands business operations to help you understand scenarios that should be modeled to answer that question of which products and which DC for which customers in what quantities and what time of year and all those things. That really starts yielding that next level results in both cost reduction and order fulfillment speed and customer happiness. Just to put it in simple terms, is I get what I want when I want it. And I don't understand everything that happened before I ordered it, but I get what I want when I want it. And that at the end of the day is what a business wants to do.
Well said. It really does kind of all boil down to that. I know you both mentioned strategy. When it comes to a company trying to decide between running their own distribution center or working with a third-party provider, Mike, can you tell us some of the factors that really should be coming into play or things that they need to be considering?
Sure. And yeah, Mark probably can add to what I say as well on this one. I think it comes down to, is distribution the core competency of a given company? As example, if I'm a manufacturing company, I might be really good at making stuff. I might be really bad at running a distribution center. I may just view that as a cost center, a necessary evil to get stuff out the door. Folks like that is typically where we would, have not a break point, but a discussion about, hey, does it make more sense to have someone else do this? There's other companies where that distribution operation is the face of their company to the client. They don't want other people messing around in that. They want to have complete control. So when someone calls, they know exactly where that order is, where it's being processed. It gets handled the right way. Like fashion retail comes to mind on that. People pay a lot of money for stuff. There's a certain presentation of the product to the customer. When they open the box, they don't want to see 5 bags with their expensive clothes. They want them nice laid out. It's almost like a gift box. So you're not going to typically get that from a 3PL. The other piece is how capital averse they are, because usually when we do these projects, the end result is, okay, here's how many people you need to run this. And those numbers can get really big. And with, labor situations today, sometimes, they don't want to have responsibility to go out and find that many people to run these centers, or they may not want to invest the capital in the automation required to minimize the amount of labor. So a lot of times a 3PL is good for those folks too. It always comes up in discussion in these projects of how you want to do this. It really comes back to the comfort level of the customer with doing it. A lot of them don't want to give up the control. Others are trying to build something, build this network because they want to sell it to someone else later. They may be more open to having that, less of an asset-based network and, more of an expense-based network. So I don't have a great answer for it, but, there are a lot of factors that go into that decision and that discussion.
Sure. I mean, I'm sure that in an ideal world, everybody wants all of those things. You want the package, you want to save money, you want everything, but realistically, it has to come down to what are your actual goals for the projects and things along those lines. So,
Yeah, it's goals and the comfort level of taking that on.
sure. Well, when you are talking about things like future growth, adding SKUs, or changing customer expectations, keeping those customer expectations into consideration, what things are you considering when you're planning a network design?
Right. So, yeah, this is really where that strategic piece and our expertise can come into it, like Mark mentioned. Um, Growth is a huge factor in these, and I know there's a question later on that I'll have an answer about growth. Um, but growth is really a paramount piece of this that people just don't consider. You know, when we do a distribution facility design, people just tell you, yeah, I'm going to grow 3% a year. We ask much more detailed questions here around growth. SKU expansion is somewhat important, more so if we're getting into the actual within the four wall design, we'll really look at SKU expansion. But, you know, one thing that's not mentioned here that we do incorporate is just how the business expands. And this is where the strategy comes in of, are you guys thinking of buying someone? Is there something that we need to know about further down the road that isn't happening today that we need to take into account in this network design? Those are where the conversations get really deep, because we really want to understand that, are the customers in the same area that your current customers are? Is this a geographical expansion? Because we'll try to factor that in here. The other one is the customer expectation. We've all been affected by folks like Amazon where, I order something today and now I can get it the same day, or, the next day is now kind of that second tier service in many instances. So service is a big thing in these designs. So we really dig in, and we talk to people that we typically wouldn't if we're just designing a facility. We really want to get down to what the goals around service are, because that's a major driver in these. There's two ways to get service. I can pay more for freight and expedite things, or I can locate distribution centers closer to those demand centers. So, both options work, but, the curves and the metrics of those look a whole lot different. So, the points you brought up, we spent an enormous amount of time on the front end vetting these, validating these, documenting them. So we're sure that all these scenarios we build fit what the requirements are. The worst result for us is to get a great answer, but it doesn't meet the requirements of what the customer wants.
And like you said, a lot of work being done on the front end to make sure everything gets rolled out the way that it's intended to meet those customer and client expectations. But I'm wondering, once all of that work is done, the design is in place, Mark, can you tell us how DCS is really helping clients bring those changes to life, especially when it's time to scale or make any adjustments?
Sure. There's a lot of, depending on the scenario that is chosen as the quote winner, the strategy for execution, it's not as simple as, okay, we're going to go do this. Because there's usually some nuance to it. For example, one that I remember that comes to mind had to do with, as Mike alluded to, acquisitions. A company was acquiring two different smaller competitors to roll into their network. And the final answer was not in doubt as to what that final network should look like. But the sequencing of events, there was a tremendous difference in which acquisition they made first as to the intermediate cost between year one and say year five, when they were going to be at final answer. The difference in years 2, 3, and 4, the cost was dramatically different if they acquired one company prior to the other. So it became a sequencing of events in between time for those acquisitions for the right way to both expand existing DCs and eliminate redundant DCs. So that's one area where after you have the answer, then you have to go and find the steps to the answer. And then the part that really gets inside the four walls is, what does that expansion look like? The network strategy may call for location A to be modified first. So then we have to get into the design of what does that mean to modify location A? What's the lead time of the modification that is required? Is it a simple modification that's 3 to 6 months, or is it something with advanced automation that's 18 to 24 months, depending on lead time of the machine?
And the other piece of that really compounds this is real estate agreements. So we might look at, just an example, keep math simple. We look at a network that has 5 facilities existing, and we change some of those around. But 4 of the 5 have long-term leases. We have a lot of times either it's cost prohibitive to get out of the lease, and it can actually outweigh the savings of moving it. So we have to wait 4 or 5 years for that lease to expire. So typically, one of our deliverables in every project like this is we will build a long-term roadmap mapping out facility number 4 is the first one that you'll do something with, and that's in year 1. You do that right away. Gets you this much savings right off the bat. And then years 2 through 5, here's the sequence for the rest of the network. And it could go out even to 10 years sometimes. And like Mark said, if there's acquisitions in there, we have to kind of layer those in. We have to be very careful how we do that, because typically those aren't widely communicated. They're not kind of in the public domain yet. So, we have to be a little creative how we position that stuff. And some of it, honestly, our clients have to kind of make the adjustments. I mean, it's a big transformational organizational thing, because we're often recommending closing a facility and moving it far enough away where they have a pretty big separation that they have to deal with. They have to let people go. They have to relocate people. So those things, very rarely do we have one of these projects come out and, it has a 2-year implementation and you're done. So I didn't mean to jump on Mark's question here, but I felt it was important to add that, because there are a lot of mitigating factors that on a normal warehouse job, you're just not going to get.
Sure. No, yeah. A lot of things to take into consideration. Sorry, go ahead.
To Mike's point, the plan is usually not difficult to understand. Here's what we need to do and the sequence we need to do it in. The execution gets very hard because of all the real world stuff Mike just talked about. And those are the things we know. And then there's the things we don't know. The unexpected that happens, that always throws a wrench in it. But to, the question of how does Waller and DCS help a client walk all the way through execution, that typically the next phase after this network study is completed is, okay, this facility goes first. The DC design or redesign. It may be a new DC that needs to be designed from scratch. It's a greenfield. Or it could be a retrofit. And that's where our DC design team gets involved to design a facility that supports the strategy that was developed out of the network study. And it may be 3 of the same facility, but more than likely it's going to be each DC will have a slightly different design and execution strategy from the previous one. Even if they're supporting the same SKU sets, they're not supporting the same customer base with the same requirements and things of that nature. But that's where the inside the four walls team, to phrase it that way, gets involved with designing what that solution looks like, the equipment and technology, and then all the way through the procurement, installation, commissioning, testing, training the operations team if needed, aftermarket go live support, warranty service. All that is all part of our service offerings and the things we can bring to the table. If a client wants us to walk them from, I have an idea for a network study, all the way through a 10-year plan to execute new DCs, including training their hourly employees across 10 years, we can do all of that. Doesn't usually become, it's not the typical scope, but we're ready for that, or any piece of it in between. So that's, that we like to say that, what someone like Mike comes in and leads a network design study and he never goes away. He's involved in the project for as long as there's a project, whether through the DC design, the go live, all of that. You get to work with the same team members and team leaders all the way through. We bring the specialized skill sets in and out as needed for the specialty areas of engineering. But it's a consistent client-facing execution team to help instill the confidence and trust that, they've been there with me and they will be there with me all the way through.
Mike, is there an example that comes to mind of a logistics network redesign that had a really clear impact on a client's supply chain performance?
Oh, yeah, there's several. Obviously, I can't mention names, but
Sure.
yeah, I mean, typically on these, we see savings of anywhere from 5 to maybe even as high as 25%.
Wow.
I think there's no delicate way to say it, but it depends how messed up the network was before we got there. There's some where if a company has really grown quickly and aggressively through acquisition, those are the easy ones. There's always going to be a lot of savings because, we took one, Mark was involved with this one too. There's a company with 32 distribution locations. We were able to close, I think, 7 of them, and the savings were close to 30%. I mean, they were up in the 25% range because, we lost a lot of leases. Our transportation costs actually got better with less facilities because we put them in the right places. This is one where we did a distribution center of the future design project for them as well. So within the 4 walls, we also saved over what they had today because we designed a much more efficient operation. So, yeah, I mean, these always save money. I mean, some are much lower. Just, I won't say we have control over that, but there's some going in that we can get a good feel that, hey, there's a lot of opportunity here. There's others that people just want to move to new buildings because their leases are expiring, and those ones a lot of times are, down in those single digits because just because of lease structures, or maybe we move to a place where the labor is a little cheaper without impacting service negatively, things like that. So. Again, there's just a lot that goes into what that savings actually is.
I mean, very appealing, though, to clients or potential clients if they are thinking about doing a network evaluation, starting from the very beginning. What do you think that very first step should be, and what do they need to be prepared with and prepared for, really, right at those early stages?
It's hard to say what their first step should be. I can say what the first steps are after we get involved. I'd say the first step would be to call us. That's probably the easy answer here. And we can help them get to what they need to bring to the table, what we need to help them. But the biggest thing I would say, at least from my perspective, the answer to this question is they need to bring an awful lot of data. There's just a massive data that we ask for. And it, for someone to look at that, it's pretty awe-inspiring, but we walk them through it. We explain why we need all this stuff. And then the second thing is just an open mind, because a lot of these projects, it's easy for them to get derailed because the person we're doing it for either has a very constricted view of what they're expecting out of this or what they expect the end result to be, or they have an unrealistic view of what we can and can't do. So, I mean, I think the first step is just have an open conversation with us about, here's what I'm looking for as a client. We're very open to what we can provide as a partner and what these outcomes can be. And, obviously there's a lot that we can bring to the table, but we really have to make sure that it fits what the client is looking for.
You can't start without that first conversation. So great advice, everyone. Gentlemen, thank you so much for all of the advice and for joining us today and sharing all of your insight with our viewers and listeners.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
And thank you out there for tuning in. If you enjoyed this conversation, we hope you'll consider joining us for the next one. Be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. We'd love to have you keep joining us. Until next time, I'm Yasmin Hassan, and this has been On Time in Full.